When we invest in something and we see the outcome of that and it multiplies more and more. And that's the kind of love returns that we're talking about today. Merry Christmas. It's a blessing. Oh yeah, you can say back, Merry Christmas. It's a blessing to get here because I don't know about for you, but for me it seems like this has been a long season. And we as a church have been on this season together through the Red Letter Advent. And as we've been looking at this Red Letter Advent, we've been looking at all of the things that bring us and point us to Christ and to Christmas and to today. And so we've been looking at elements of hope, peace, joy, and love. And here's some of the things that we've talked about. Hope being the confident expectation in the promises and faithfulness of God. A peace that's found in Jesus. Joy being more than a feeling, but an attitude that comes from being cared for and having a place where you belong as a child of God. And love, God's agape love that comes to us through the life, work, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And those have been kind of where we've gone on this journey, but we've made it to the end. And if you have been reading through and you haven't done today's devotion, I'm going to spoil it for you, and I'm sorry. But the 25th, it looks like this, and the words for today are love returns. And that seems a little odd to me when I first read it, because as I think of returns and the holiday season, I think of all of the dread that comes on December 26th. So I used to work retail when I was in high school, and I remember no one wanted to work on December 26th, because on that day, all of the presents that no one really wanted go back to the store. And so you have mounds and mounds of things that you have to put back on shelves or restock. You've got post offices that are overwhelmed. You've got all of the things that come with it, but not only all of the stuff that people didn't want, you have all the attitudes that change overnight. Because in that, dread is also this anger that people didn't get the right thing, or it doesn't fit, or something's wrong. And so, as I looked at this, that's the first thing that came to mind. Thankfully, that's not where the author goes. Zach Zender, who wrote the book, he changes where he's going with the story when it comes to love returns. Up to this point, he's been talking about kind of an online shopping experience. So we saw last night that Christmas was unboxed, that Christ came to us. And today, as we look at returns, love returns, we use his definition, right? That return isn't about returning the love to the giver, but the love return is when we multiply the love given to us by giving it away to others. It's this investment. That's the type of returns that he's talking about, that when we invest in something and we see the outcome of that and it multiplies more and more. And that's the kind of love returns that we're talking about today. And so we got to know where that love comes from as we look at the returns that it brings. And it really starts with Christmas. It starts with Jesus in a manger. And John, which is kind of the traditional reading for this morning, for Christmas morning, he talks about a light coming into the darkness. That Jesus comes in to all the things that are happening in the world, and he comes as a light. Something that is bright, that people kind of want to go and see, and that nothing can snuff out that light in the darkness, that nothing has overcome it. And so we see Jesus, and we see him in the manger, and we see how he brings us hope and peace and joy and love. And we see that the story is really about him and how he has come to us so long ago. So long ago. This baby in the manger. But then the question is, well, what does that have to do with returns? Well, that baby in the manger doesn't just stay in the manger, but he grows up. And as he grows up, he begins to change the story of the people around him. As you read through the Gospels, you begin to see how Jesus reaches to people you wouldn't think about. The untouchables of society, the people who were sick, the people who were lame, the people who no one else cared about. And as he does that, he begins to spread his love to the world around him. He begins to demonstrate why it was he came in a manger, and he begins to share how people can find care and belonging through Jesus and through God, and how much he loves them by sending Jesus. And that love is something that does multiply. Because if you are touched by the love of God, it doesn't just sit, but it changes who you are in a way that just reforms you and changes your story. And so, as John is writing his letter to the church, he says this: "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God, as seen in who Jesus is. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God." And what is it that we know? We know that Jesus didn't just stay in that manger, but that love multiplied through him to the people around him. And he didn't just multiply it to those people, but he took on the sin of the world on his shoulders. He died on the cross, and then there's this empty tomb. And that empty tomb helps us know that his promises and his faithfulness, all the things that were promised in the Old Testament and in the kind of first prophecies, are all true because of who he is. And so we see this empty tomb as furthering the story, as showing God's love for us, which means we can show it for other people. For God so loved us, right? And if we keep on reading in the book of John, where our gospel came from, we get to chapter 3 and the famous words, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son." God loved all of us enough to send Jesus, and also not just to send him, but to have his life where he cared for people, and all the way up to an empty tomb where he shows that he cares for us. And so what does this all have to do about love returns? Well, if we can take that story and we can internalize it, and we can say, yes, that's my story, and I've been changed by who Jesus is, that he loves me, that he forgives me, and I have a hope because of who he is, we begin to see what it means that we can love because he first loved us. It's really easy to read these words. It's really easy just to talk about how God's love returns and see and just kind of map it out over the year. But I want to challenge us today to actually see how God's love returns. And I want you to take a minute and think about someone in your life who the story of Jesus has not been unboxed for. The story of Jesus is not something that they know. And the challenge for this morning, and I think for this next year, is to pray for that person on a very routine and regular basis. And as you pray, and as you connect with that person, be curious. Be curious about how they're doing, but not just how they're doing in life, how they're doing in their spirituality, how they're doing with how God is, and how they're loved, and how they're forgiven. And as you're curious, be willing to share your story. Be willing to step in and share that love that God has for you through the baby Jesus and his life, death, and resurrection, so that they too can know who God is. They can know his love for them. And in that, it returns. My hope is that we can see how God's love returns time and time and time again as we connect to him, but we connect to others and connect them into that love we know. Because as we know that we are loved and forgiven children of God because of the baby that comes at Christmas in Jesus, we know that there is a love and forgiveness that bring us hope, that can bring hope to other people as well. And in that, God's love returns. Amen.